Welcome to the deep dive. This time, we're going green.
Yeah, we're diving into the world of big businesses, the ones making those bold pledges to go net zero. And, it's not just your typical tech giants this time.
Right. It's a pretty diverse group, actually.
Yeah, we got some really fascinating articles here highlighting companies from, well, you wouldn't believe it, construction.
Construction, cosmetics. It's amazing to see which industries are stepping up.
Seriously,
Okay.
get ready to be surprised because some of these names you just wouldn't expect.
What's really interesting, I think, is that it's not just about saying they're going green. It's about actually taking those concrete steps.
Right. It's about action, not just words.
Exactly. And the range of actions they're taking is pretty impressive, too.
Definitely. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's take a step back. For anyone just tuning in, maybe we should start with the basics. What does net zero even mean? We hear it everywhere these days.
Yeah, it's become a bit of a buzzword, hasn't it?
It has. So net zero, what is it really?
Well, think of it like a balancing act. Picture a scale. Okay, I'm picturing a scale.
On one side of the scale, you've got the greenhouse gases a company releases into the atmosphere, all those emissions.
Right, the stuff that contributes to climate change.
Exactly. And on the other side of the scale, they need to remove an equal amount. So it's about reaching a point where their impact on the planet is, well, effectively zero.
So they're not just cutting down on emissions, they're actually trying to, undo some of the damage.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
It's about neutralizing their impact as much as possible.
That's a pretty big shift in thinking, isn't it? It's not just about doing less harm, it's about actually trying to make things right.
It is. And it goes beyond just individual companies, too.
Oh, right. Remember the Paris Agreement?
Exactly. That global agreement to limit global warming. Well, net zero is a crucial part of making that agreement a reality.
So it's a global effort, not just a corporate one.
It has to be. Climate change is a global problem, and it requires a global solution.
Okay, so we've got the basics down. Now, for the fun part, these articles you sent in highlight some pretty unexpected industries that are taking the lead in this net zero race.
Yeah, some of these you just wouldn't expect.
Like construction. I mean, you wouldn't typically think of construction as being, at the forefront of environmentalism.
Not really. It's an industry known for, well, heavy machinery, tons of dust.
Lots of concrete.
Right, exactly. Not exactly the image of eco-friendliness.
But some major players are really challenging that perception. I'm looking at the names here. ThyssenKrupp, Heidelberg Cement, Cemex, they're all aiming for climate neutrality, some by 2045. With some pretty ambitious interim targets, too, like Heidelberg Cement wants to hit a 30% emissions reduction by 2025.
Yeah, those are some aggressive targets.
It makes you wonder, how are they making such drastic changes in an industry that's so, well, concrete?
It's definitely a challenge, but they're tackling it from all angles. Think energy efficiency upgrades, switching to alternative fuels for all that heavy equipment.
Oh, yeah, I can see that making a big difference.
And they're even exploring carbon capture technologies, which is pretty exciting.
Carbon capture, that sounds pretty futuristic, like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It kind of is.
Yeah.
But it's becoming more and more of a reality. And Heidelberg Cement is even pushing for concrete recycling, which is a fascinating development.
Concrete recycling, so like taking old buildings and turning them back into, I don't know, gravel.
Well, not exactly gravel, but you get the idea. It's about reusing that concrete instead of just sending it to landfill.
That makes sense.
It reduces waste and the need to produce brand new concrete, which is a very energy-intensive process.
So it's a double win for the environment.
Exactly. And it's not just about doing the right thing either. These companies are realizing that sustainability can actually make them more competitive.
Really? How so?
Well, for one thing, it can lead to cost savings.
Okay, that makes sense. Less waste, lower energy bills.
Exactly. And it can also boost their brand reputation, which can attract customers and investors.
It's like sustainability is becoming a good business strategy, not just an ethical one.
Exactly. It's becoming a win-win for everyone involved.
Speaking of competition, what about the retail world? Are we seeing any eco-champions emerge there?
Absolutely. IKEA, for example, is going beyond net zero. They're aiming to be climate positive by 2030.
Climate positive. Wow, that's a whole other level. It's like they're saying, we're not just going to neutralize our impact, we're actually going to heal the planet.
It's a bold goal, for sure. But they seem committed to making it happen.
What does that even mean in practice? How do you become climate positive?
Well, they're talking about renewable energy for all their operations,
Mhm.
using sustainable materials, even encouraging customers to repair and reuse products longer.
So it's about changing consumer behavior too. Not just about what IKEA does as a company, but about how their customers use and think about their products.
Exactly. It's about changing the whole system.
And that's where a company like Patagonia comes in, right? They're committed to being carbon positive as well, aiming for 2025.
Yep. And one of their key strategies is switching to regenerative organic certified cotton, or ROC cotton.
ROC cotton, I haven't heard of that one. What's so special about it?
It's not just about being organic. ROC cotton goes further, focusing on soil health, animal welfare, fair labor practices. It actually helps draw carbon from the atmosphere and store it in the soil.
So it's good for the environment and the people who grow it?
It's a triple win.
That's amazing.
And Patagonia also encourages product repair and reuse. It's like they're saying buy less, but buy better and keep it longer. They're shifting the focus from disposable fast fashion to durable, sustainable goods.
It's like a complete rethinking of the relationship between consumer and product. It's not just a transaction, it's a commitment.
That's a great way to put it. It's about building a more sustainable relationship with the things we buy and use.
What other industries are catching your eye with their net zero ambitions? Anything outside of retail and construction?
Let's talk about pharmaceuticals. AstraZeneca, a real giant in the field, is aiming for net zero by 2030. And they're putting their money where their mouth is with $1 billion investment in green initiatives.
$1 billion? That's not chump change. What are they focusing on with that kind of investment?
They're making big moves towards 100% renewable energy, optimizing their manufacturing processes to minimize waste and emissions. They're even partnering with their suppliers to make their entire supply chain more sustainable.
So it's not just about their own operations, it's about influencing their entire network.
Exactly. They're using their leverage to create a ripple effect.
That's pretty powerful.
It is. And they're even investing in carbon removal solutions, things like carbon capture and storage technologies.
Carbon capture, didn't we talk about that with the construction industry?
We did. It's a technology that's gaining a lot of traction. It's like a giant vacuum cleaner for CO2, capturing emissions from industrial processes or directly from the air and storing them underground so they don't enter the atmosphere.
So they're not just cutting down, they're literally sucking pollution out of the air. That's incredible. What about other pharmaceutical companies? Is AstraZeneca alone in this?
Not at all. Novartis is targeting carbon neutrality by 2040. Their approach is a combination of renewable energy, sustainable sourcing, and something they call green chemistry.
Green chemistry, does that mean they're actually changing the way they make their products?
It's exactly that. Instead of just focusing on creating effective medicines, they're looking at the entire life cycle of a drug, from sourcing the ingredients to manufacturing to disposal, and finding ways to minimize the environmental impact at every stage.
So they're asking themselves, can we cure diseases without creating new environmental problems?
That's a great way to put it.
And what about Takeda? They're another big name in pharmaceuticals, right?
They are, and they're also on the path to net zero by 2040. Their focus is on renewable energy, supply chain collaboration, and carbon offsets for those really hard-to-tackle emissions.
It's really encouraging to see that even industries that deal with such complex processes are finding ways to go green. But what about industries where decarbonization seems almost impossible? I'm thinking about freight, with all those ships and trucks burning fossil fuels.
You're right, that's a tough one. But even in freight, we're seeing some major players stepping up. Take Maersk and Hamburg Süd, two of the biggest names in shipping. They're both aiming for net zero by 2050.
2050 seems so far away, though. Do they really have enough time to turn those massive fleets around? I mean, those are huge ships.
It's a massive undertaking for sure. They're starting with energy efficiency, optimizing routes, upgrading to more fuel-efficient ships, and even experimenting with alternative fuels.
Alternative fuels for ships? I can't even picture what that would look like.
Well, biofuels are one option, but they're also looking at things like ammonia and hydrogen. Maersk is even set to launch a carbon-neutral vessel powered by methanol later this year.
A carbon-neutral ship, that's incredible. What about those land-based giants, the delivery companies? Are they making any moves toward net zero? I'm thinking DHL, UPS.
Definitely. DHL and UPS are both aiming for net zero by 2052.
But they face the same challenge as those shipping companies, right? How do you electrify a massive fleet of delivery trucks?
It's not easy. The DHL, for example, wants 70% of their last-mile deliveries to be done with clean solutions like electric vans by 2025.
So those final trips to your doorstep, basically.
Right. And they're optimizing their routes and logistics to reduce overall fuel consumption.
Makes sense. What about UPS? Are they doing anything similar?
They're also going big on electric vehicles, and they're even experimenting with hydrogen fuel cell technology.
Wow, hydrogen fuel cells. That's cutting-edge stuff. It's amazing to see how they're pushing the boundaries in a sector that's traditionally been so reliant on fossil fuels.
It's really encouraging. And it shows that even the most challenging industries can find ways to innovate and decarbonize.
It's inspiring to see such a diverse range of industries committing to net zero. But I'm curious, how are they actually making it happen? It can't just be wishful thinking, right?
Definitely not. They're putting real strategies into action. And those strategies are just as diverse as the companies themselves. But we can break them down into a few key categories.
All right, let's dive into those strategies. I'm eager to hear how these companies are turning those ambitious goals into reality. So we've seen these amazing examples of companies from all these different industries, right? They're all making these big, bold pledges to go net zero. But now let's get into the details. How are they actually pulling this off? It can't just be all talk, right?
Oh no, definitely not. There's real action behind those pledges, for sure. And the strategies they're using are just as varied as the companies themselves. But there are some common threads we can definitely pull out.
Okay, so let's unravel those threads then. What are those main strategies? How are they actually making this net zero thing happen?
Well, first up, let's talk about operational changes. This is where companies really take a good look inward. They're trying to figure out how to cut emissions within their own facilities, their own processes, all that.
So basically making their day-to-day operations more efficient, more eco-friendly. What does that look like in the real world? Any good examples?
Well, think back to AstraZeneca, the pharmaceutical company we were just talking about. They're doing a lot to optimize their manufacturing processes, trying to use less energy, produce less waste, all of that. And they're also switching their company cars and trucks over to electric vehicles whenever possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. Less energy, less fuel, and boom, fewer emissions overall. Seems like a pretty straightforward strategy.
It can be, yeah. But sometimes it takes some serious investment up front. Like, you've got to upgrade to more energy efficient equipment, maybe even retrofit entire facilities. But you know what? A lot of these companies are finding out that it pays off in the long run. Not just for the planet, but for their bottom line, too.
Oh, how so?
Well, they end up with lower energy costs, for one thing.
Right. Makes sense. Less waste, less spending.
Exactly. It's a win-win for the company and the planet.
So we've got operational changes. What's another big strategy companies are using to get to net zero?
Renewable energy is huge, and honestly, we're seeing it just about everywhere these days. Companies are finally catching on that they can actually power their operations with cleaner sources, like solar, wind, hydropower, all that good stuff.
Yeah, and it seems like the cost of renewables keeps dropping too. Solar and wind power are getting cheaper and cheaper all the time.
They are, and that's making it even more attractive for businesses to make the switch. Any standout examples come to mind from our research? Any companies really leading the way with renewables?
Well, IKEA is a big one, right? They've been pouring billions of euros into renewable energy projects. I think I read somewhere they're actually on track to produce more renewable energy than they consume.
That's right. They're not just buying renewable energy, they're actually becoming energy producers themselves.
Wow, that's a pretty big deal. It's not just about offsetting their own impact, it's about contributing to a bigger solution.
Exactly. And we're seeing this trend pop up more and more.
Yeah.
Companies putting solar panels on their rooftops, investing in wind farms, even looking into geothermal energy. They're going from just being energy consumers to becoming energy generators.
Okay, so that we've got operational changes, renewable energy. What's next? What's the third piece of the puzzle here?
Let's talk about carbon offsetting. It's become a bit of a buzzword, but this is where companies invest in projects that reduce emissions somewhere else. To make up for the emissions, they can't eliminate themselves, at least not yet.
So kind of like finding a balance. They reduce what they can internally and then offset the rest.
Exactly. You can think of it as a bridge to net zero. For a lot of companies, especially the ones in those hard to decarbonize industries, carbon offsets are going to be super important in the short term, at least while they're still working on cleaner technologies and processes.
Okay, so what are some of the projects that fall under carbon offsetting? Give us some examples.
Oh, there are tons. Reforestation is always a popular one, like we were talking about earlier. And there are projects capturing methane from landfills, getting rid of harmful industrial gases. Some are even investing in renewable energy projects in developing countries.
So companies basically funding emissions reductions all over the world. Interesting. But how do we know those projects are actually legit? I mean, there's a lot of potential for greenwashing with offsets, right?
That's a great point. And you're right, there is. That's why it's so important to make sure that these offset projects are actually legit, that they're actually reducing emissions. Thankfully, there are standards and verification processes to make sure that happens.
Okay, so there's some oversight. That makes me feel better.
Right. Transparency and accountability are so important.
Transparency and accountability, those seem to be themes that keep coming up as we talk about net zero.
They really are. And it's not just about the companies themselves, it's the whole ecosystem. Customers want more info about the environmental impact of what they're buying. Investors are starting to really scrutinize the sustainability performance of the companies they invest in.
So sustainability is becoming like a business necessity, not just a nice to have.
It really is. It's not a niche concern anymore. It's core business strategy now.
All right, so far we've got operational changes, we've got renewable energy, we've got carbon offsetting. Are there any other big strategies companies are using to get to net zero?
One that's gaining a lot of traction is focusing on sustainable materials and the circular economy, especially big in retail and manufacturing, those kinds of industries.
Okay, break that down for me. What does that look like in real life?
Well, you've got to think about the whole life cycle of a product, from the raw materials it's made from, all the way to production, use, even disposal. The circular economy is about designing products that can be reused, repaired, recycled, minimize waste, minimize digging up new resources.
So it's like creating a closed loop, where materials are constantly being reused and repurposed.
That's it. And that's where the whole idea of sustainable materials comes in. Companies are looking for alternative materials that don't have such a big environmental footprint. Remember Patagonia and their ROC cotton? That's a great example.
Oh yeah, we were talking about that earlier. It's not just organic, it actually helps the soil, right?
Exactly. It's not just reducing their impact, it's actually having a positive impact.
That's so cool.
IKEA is another great one. They're incorporating recycled materials into their furniture, making sure they use sustainably sourced wood. And they're even designing their products so they're easier to take apart and recycle. When you're finally done with that bookshelf years down the road.
So it's not just about what they make, it's how they make it. And this is all part of a bigger shift towards a more sustainable business model, right?
That's exactly right. And it's not just good for the planet. It can actually be good for business, too.
Oh, in what way?
Using recycled materials can sometimes be cheaper than using brand new materials. And if you design your products to last longer and be easier to repair, people might be more likely to stay loyal to your brand. Plus, it can really boost your reputation.
Yeah, if a company is known for making things that last and are good for the environment, that's a pretty big selling point.
It really is. It all ties into this bigger trend, I think. Companies realizing that sustainability isn't just about following rules or just trying to look good. It's about creating something that benefits everyone involved long term.
Well, speaking of everyone involved, there's one group we haven't talked about yet. Financial institutions. I mean, they're the ones bankrolling all these net zero initiatives, right? They're providing the capital.
Oh, you're so right. And that's where things get even more interesting. Because financial institutions are really starting to wake up to the whole climate change thing. And they're realizing that it's not just an ethical issue, it's an economic one too.
So you mean they're realizing that climate change could actually impact their investments?
Yeah, they're starting to understand the risks involved. But they're also seeing the incredible opportunities that come with investing in a greener future.
So it's a double-edged sword.
Exactly.
Let's dive into some specific examples then. I know our research highlighted a few financial giants who are really leading the way. Where should we start?
So we've talked about all these companies, right? All these different industries taking on these big net zero goals. But let's not forget about the financial institutions. They're the ones who are really making it happen in a lot of ways. I mean, they're the ones with the money, right?
You're absolutely right. They're not just sitting on the sidelines anymore. They're stepping up and becoming major players in this whole movement. It's pretty exciting to see, actually.
Yeah, it really is. It's like they're realizing that climate change isn't just some abstract problem for someone else to deal with. It's something that could directly affect them.
It's definitely a wake-up call for a lot of them. They're starting to understand that climate change is a financial risk, too, not just an environmental one. Right, so they're not just donating to green causes or something. They're
Yeah.
making real changes to the way they do business.
Exactly. They're setting their own net zero goals, coming up with these really innovative financial products to help sustainable businesses, and even taking a hard look at their own investments to make sure they're aligned with a low carbon future.
Wow, that's a pretty big shift. It sounds like they're seeing this whole sustainability thing as an opportunity, not just a challenge.
That's a great way to put it. They're starting to understand that investing in a greener future is not just the right thing to do for the planet, it's also a smart business move.
Okay, so let's dive into some specifics here. Our research pointed out a few big names, some real leaders in the financial world. Where should we start?
Well, HSBC is a great example. They've made this big public commitment to reach net zero by 2050, and they're actually putting their money where their mouth is.
Okay, give me the details. What are they actually doing?
Well, for starters, they're investing a ton of money in renewable energy. Their asset management branch is pouring billions of dollars into things like solar farms and wind farms all over the world.
So they're literally putting their money where their mouth is.
Exactly. But it's not just about investing in renewable energy themselves. They're also developing all these financial products for their clients. Things like green bonds, sustainability-linked loans, all kinds of stuff to help other businesses become more sustainable too.
So they're using their power and influence to really make a difference. That's pretty cool.
It's a really positive development. It shows how much the financial world is changing. It's not just about avoiding risk anymore. It's about actively promoting and supporting positive change.
HSBC is definitely setting a high bar. Are there any other financial institutions that are, following their lead?
Oh, definitely. BNP Paribas, another big European bank, is right up there with them. They've created these things called climate governance frameworks to make sure their investments are in line with the Paris Agreement.
Climate governance frameworks. Sounds kind of complicated. What does that even mean?
Basically, it means they're setting really specific targets for reducing the carbon footprint of their investments and their loans. And they're being super transparent about it all, which is great.
So it's all about accountability and transparency.
Exactly. And BNP Paribas is also one of the founding members of the Net Zero Banking Alliance.
What's that? The Net Zero Banking Alliance.
It's this group of banks that have all pledged to make sure their investments and loans are aligned with reaching net zero emissions by 2050. So they're all working together to make it happen.
Wow, that's impressive. It's not just about individual action anymore. It's about collective action, working together to create a bigger impact.
Exactly. And it's not just a European thing either. Standard Chartered, which has a really strong presence in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, is also doing some incredible work in sustainable finance.
Okay, tell me about Standard Chartered. What are they doing that's so special?
Well, they've been funding all sorts of really cool reforestation projects, helping to plant trees, restore land that's been degraded, and basically pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. And they're also one of the biggest players in financing clean energy projects, especially solar and wind.
So they're not just trying to avoid bad investments. They're actively seeking out good ones, the ones that are actually helping to create a greener future.
Exactly. And that's where the real opportunity lies for financial institutions. It's not just about avoiding risk anymore. It's about actually creating value by investing in solutions to climate change.
So it sounds like the financial world is going through a pretty big transformation. It's really encouraging to see. But I'm curious, is it just the big banks that are leading this charge? What about those smaller players, the fintech companies? They're usually pretty innovative. Are they getting involved in this too?
Absolutely. In fact, this is where things get really interesting. We're seeing all this amazing innovation in green technologies and financial products that are making it easier for everyone to get involved in sustainable finance. Individuals, small businesses, everyone.
Okay, tell me more about this green fintech revolution. What's catching your eye?
Well, one really cool development is the use of big data and artificial intelligence to analyze green investments. They're using AI to help investors make smarter, more sustainable decisions.
So basically using technology to make the whole process more efficient and effective.
Exactly. And then there's blockchain technology. They're using that to create these more transparent and secure carbon markets, which is a really big deal.
Yeah, we talked earlier about how important transparency is, especially when it comes to carbon offsets. It sounds like blockchain could really help with that.
It could. And it's not just about institutional investors. There are all these apps and platforms now that let regular people track their own carbon footprint, invest in green projects, and even offset their travel emissions. It's all right there on your phone.
Wow, that's amazing. So basically, anyone can get involved in sustainable finance now. You don't have to be a Wall Street expert or anything.
That's what's so exciting about it. It's becoming a movement, not just a niche thing for a select few.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one message you want to leave our listeners with?
The biggest takeaway for me is that the transition to a net zero future isn't just about avoiding disaster. It's about creating something better, a healthier planet, a stronger economy, a more just world. And it's something that everyone can be a part of.
I love that. It's a message of hope and possibility, not doom and gloom. And it's a good reminder that we all have a role to play.
Well, on that note, we'll leave our listeners with one final thought to ponder. How can you, with your own unique skills and passions, contribute to this net zero revolution? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We'll see you next time.